show you what I'm actually busy doing at the machine, I just wanted to show you some settings on the Janome Continental M7 that I have selected for the project that I'm busy with. First of all, notice that I'm in the quilting category and I've selected the serpentine stitch. Now, if I go to the adjust menu, you will see that I've got a favorite stitch category, and I have saved my serpentine stitch with a stitch width of 7 and a stitch length of 1.6, because that was the setting I wanted for this particular project. So I've saved it so that every time I come back to use that same serpentine stitch, I don't need to key the stitch width and stitch length in. It's done. I also want to point out that I have got the needle up down selected, or the pivot function selected, so that when I stop, the needle will stop in the fabric and I won't lose my spot. Also, notice that this here, which is the AccuFeed Flex Plus icon, is grayed out, and the reason that it's grayed out, and I don't know if you can see this, no, I've moved the camera slightly. If we touch this new function icon, I have manual dual feed switched on, and that is because I'm not doing a straight stitch, I'm doing the serpentine, but I still want my feed dogs, my upper feed dogs, to work. So there we are. Let's go back to the screen. That's all the settings that I want, and now I will come down and show you what I'm doing at the machine. I have the AccuFeed Flex foot on, and I'm just going to bring the camera a little bit closer so that you can really see closely. I hope I'm not going to bump the camera as I'm sewing. I will show you in another video how I constructed the blocks, quilt as you go blocks with this, and how I then put them together. Now I've got sashing strips that I have fused onto my quilt, just so that I don't have to pin and get pricked with a million pins. I have fused it to the quilt, and I am now stitching along here doing my serpentine stitch. I have the same on, let me flip it over here so that you can see, I have exactly the same on the back of the quilt. I have the same sashing strips there. So I'm doing both sides of the quilt at once. And I've chosen to use the open toe AccuFeed Flex foot because I can see where I'm going. And I found that this is very useful, so that this part, the inside part of the AccuFeed Flex open toe foot, I am running that right along the edge of my sashing strip, and that way I find it really easy to keep track and go straight. And there we go. I am doing, and I'm sorry, I think I bumped the camera there as I moved my arm. I just wanted to get it as close as I could, and I've run the risk of obviously bumping it. And as I say, there I go. The whole time I am riding the inside edge of that foot along the edge of my sashing strip. And I am doing 2 stitches for each sashing strip. I am doing it on either side of it, almost like if I was stitching some bias tape, something like that. I might want to stitch down on both sides of it. This tape is not bias because I was making a quilt and it was all straight lines. I was going to put the sashing strip down in straight lines, so I did not need the fabric to be cut on the bias. I cut it on the cross grain of the fabric, in other words, from selvage to selvage, and then I turned the ends of my tape over, pressed them, and then fused them down onto the quilt. And there we are. I've got to the end of that particular line of stitching. So I'm going to stop. And now the quilt is actually finished except for the binding. So I'm just going to put that down and move the camera over to the machine, because I'm going to show you how I did a quilt as you go block. Now you can make your block pretty much any size you want. I don't think I would go smaller than a 5-inch charm square, simply because that would just be way too fiddly for me. And I probably wouldn't go larger than about 8, possibly 9 inches. But it's up to you. You're the quilt maker. You can make it what size you want. Now, this is just scraps because I've used up all my red and green fabric that you saw a moment ago. So I have some dark bottle green fabric on the back. I've wound a bobbin in a very similar color to that. In my needle, I just have a neutral colored beige cream thread. And on my machine, I have the AccuFeed Flex foot with the 1/4 inch guide, because I'm going to be doing 1/4 inch seams on my Quilt As You Go block. I also have the machine set up with a straight stitch, a 1/4 inch piecing stitch, and that has a stitch length of 1.8, so you don't want to be doing too much reverse stitching with that. Okay. What I'm going to do is lay across diagonally, simply because I have chosen to do it diagonally. It could be done differently. You could do it like that across your block if you wanted to, but I'm going to do it diagonally. And I have another little piece of fabric here, just a strip of lime green, and I am going to position it right sides together, although it's hard to see with the lime green, right sides together, and I am now simply going to stitch, noticing that I'm riding the little guide, the 1/4 inch guide of my foot along the edge of my fabrics, and there of course are my 2 fabrics laid one on top of each other, right sides together, and I have got my needle about 1/4 inch away from my guide, and I'm simply going to go all the way down to the other side of the block, and then use my scissors to cut my thread, the scissors on the machine, and then I could finger press this, flip it over and finger press, but I have my iron, which you may not see in the camera, but it's easier than making you seasick and moving the camera. I have my ironing board sitting right next to me, and I have put it there. The next thing I'm going to show you is a strip of fabric, another strip of fabric, and we are going to do exactly the same thing. 1/4 inch seam all the way down. Notice that my cream thread is simply not going to be seen at all once I have flipped and pressed. So let me just quickly press that again at my ironing board. And then let me get another piece of fabric. This one is sort of lemon, it's a print with lemons on it, and lovely bright citrusy fresh fabrics. I happen to love these colors, and I had some scraps left over, so that's what we're using to demonstrate here. Now, can you see that I haven't quite reached my corner? So I have another little piece of green fabric, and I'm going to pop that on there. It may seem a little wasteful because it's going to get trimmed, and that's going to then get folded over. Now, I'm not going to go and do the whole of the block because I think you get the idea. I've got other fabrics to use on the other side of the block, and once I'm finished, I am obviously going to take my block to the cutting board, and I'm going to trim it off and square it up. You might want to start your block just a little bit larger than you plan to end up. So if you're planning to end up at 8-inch square, maybe start your block at 8.5. And that way you've got a bit of wiggle room for your trimming. Okay, so you'll see you can't really see the stitching terribly well on the back. Oh, you can. That is my green bobbin thread, and now my block, once it's trimmed, is complete. And then all I have to do is butt the blocks up together next to each other and zigzag them together, which is exactly what I did in that other quilt. And I will show you further things to do with this quilt in another video. Okay, I'm back again. What I've done is I have finished 2 of those Quilt As You Go blocks using my scraps. You could use any fabrics that you have on hand. These just happen to be the ones I had. And I am going to now lay those 2 blocks together, and I'm going to zigzag them together. But before I do that, I want to show you one other thing that you can do with these blocks. So I'm taking the 1/4 inch foot, the 1/4 inch AccuFeed Flex foot off the machine and putting it in my super cool little drawer on my machine. Once again, I'm working on the Janome Continental M7, and the foot that I'm putting onto the machine now is the ditch quilting foot, the AccuFeed Flex ditch quilting foot. Because I'm going through a bunch of different layers, that's why I've been using the AccuFeed Flex foot. Now, I want to come along here and I want to position the little guide on the ditch quilting foot in my ditch between my lime green and my orange fabric here. At the machine, on the machine, I won't move the camera and make you seasick. I have chosen a serpentine stitch, which is one of my all-time favorites, and I've changed the thread from the beige cream piecing thread we were using just now. I've changed it to a lime green cotton thread. It could have been a polyester thread, like an embroidery thread, which would have given a slightly different look to our stitches. And I'm simply going to ride my foot along in the ditch, using that little guide in the ditch over there, all the way to the other side. And when I get there, I'm going to use the scissors on my machine and cut. And that is a little stitch that I've done on my mug rug or placemat or one block in a lap quilt or even a bed quilt. If you keep going, this could be the most wonderful scrap busting, stash busting quilt, using up all your little bits and pieces of scraps. I could also choose other stitches. The serpentine stitch is only just one possibility. All right. So I'm not going to show any other stitches. I'll let you have playtime and fun time with those. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to position these 2 blocks right up together. I'm going to butt them right up together. Now I happen to like this V configuration of my strips. You could do it differently. You could have them lining up like that. If you're doing a scrappy quilt, you probably are not going to get orange lining up with orange and lemon lining up with lemon. I'm not going to worry about that at all here, because this is a complete scrap quilt, and I didn't worry about it with the red and green quilt either. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my utility section and choose a zigzag, and I want to make my zigzag 6 wide and 2 stitch length. And I find that that's quite a good size for when I want to zigzag these 2 halves together, or these 2 blocks together. And I'm just going to slow my speed down a little so I don't go too fast. I am doing a zigzag stitch across both blocks, so I'm catching them together. I'm not going to see these the stitching at a later point. Unless you really like it, then of course I guess you can leave it. But I mean, that doesn't look too bad, but it's not exactly what I would leave this looking as a finished sample, because these little bits here are raw edges and they're eventually going to work loose, and I'm going to have fuzzies poking out between my zigzag stitching, which I don't want. So the idea is that I'm now going to come with my strip of it's not a bias strip, but it is a strip of fabric that's had the edges turned under roughly 1/4 inch on either side, and then we will lay it down over the top and we'll stitch like I'll show you in the next video. Okay, I'm back again, and I have threaded up the machine with a orange thread this time, and I have substituted the ditch quilting foot for the open toe AccuFeed Flex foot because I want to see where I'm going. and I have made a piece of tape, like I mentioned a short while ago, and I have folded the edges under roughly 1/4 of an inch and pressed them. You probably, if you're going to do a lot of this, like if you were making a whole quilt or something more than just a mug rug or a placemat, you're probably going to want to have something like a bias tape maker. I did not have one, and so I had to rig up something different, and you can see that on Janome Life. I've got a whole lot of photographs there of what my Facebook friends suggested, and it worked. I phoned around and nobody had bias tape makers, so I guess everybody's bought up all there was to make masks, the ties for masks. Anyhow, I just quickly ironed this and I didn't burn my fingers, so that's a plus. I've changed the stitch to the serpentine stitch, which was the same stitch we did as a little decorative bit of quilting on the block a little while ago. And now I'm going to start stitching, and what I'm going to do is I am going to run the inside of the foot, the right hand inside foot of the here along the edge of my fabric, and there I go. And I have a little piece of black fabric, black thread that is got caught up there, but we'll fix that later. And here I go all the way along to the end of my little block. Once I get to the end, I can stop and press my thread cutter, and then I'm going to just cut off the excess fabric on both ends and turn it around, and I'm now going to do it on the other side, or alternatively I could leave it exactly as it was, and I could now use the left inside part of the open toe foot to ride along the left side of my strip of fabric. And there I go, all the way down that side of my fabric. And when I get to the end, press my scissors, and we are done. And there is my sashing strip across the top. Now, if we look at the back, we'll see that that did not have a strip of fabric on the back. Now, if this was going to be a wall hanging, I probably wouldn't worry, and I'd leave it as it is. If it was going to be a mug rug that's going to get washed fairly frequently, I would definitely add another strip of fabric on the back and stitch it down at the same time as I stitch it on the other side, which we just did. And because you don't want to be pinning and then sewing over pins, what I would use is some fusible web. You can buy fusible web tapes like Steamer Seam 2, or you can just cut strips of fusible web and iron it onto this and fuse it to the back. And obviously it doesn't have to be orange, bright orange against this bottle green. You could use bottle green fabric, or really any fabric you like, because it's going to be the back of your mug rug or the back of your wall hanging or the back of your quilt, whichever. So I would definitely fuse that in place. And if you're doing more than a short section, in other words, you're doing like the green and red quilt that I will show you shortly, and I've got much longer strips, I fused both the top and the bottom. And then I didn't have to worry about any pins, and I was able to just cruise through and do my 2 rows of serpentine stitch down every length of joining tape, if that's what we can call it. Okay, so that's just giving you a little bit of an idea as to what you can do. What I would probably do here is add a few more to it and make a lovely placemat, a lovely bright placemat. Or I could have left it just as one block and then ended it off around the edge with binding or with yarn couching or with a facing, who knows, whatever way you want to end off the edge of your mug rug. And that would have been plenty good, just one block. So you can see that this is a very great way to use up your scraps, use up your stash, because we've all got lots of stashes. And it's a neat project that really doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of skill. This is a great beginner project, and you can use this video that we will have for you here on our Janome Life YouTube channel. You can watch this video as many times as you like. Do a little bit and stop it, try that out, stop the video, go back and watch the video again, and then quilt some more, and continue on to complete your project at your own pace. That's the beauty of a video. Okay, thanks for tuning in, and I'll show you